Martin Luther King Jr. Who was Martin Luther King Jr.? Can you imagine a world where laws kept black and white people apart, where black children couldn't swim in the same pools as white children or go to the same schools, a place where laws made it hard for black people to vote, or where a person had to stand up on a bus so a white person can sit down? This world was real, and it happened in the United States. Martin Luther King Jr. worked hard to change the rules so they would be the same for whites and blacks. He didn't do it by fighting. He helped change unfair laws by making people think. He did it by making people feel. He did it with his words. Protesters. People who protest are called protesters. When protesters want unfair things changed, they sometimes march to show others that they do not agree with what is happening. Lots of black people and white people helped Dr. King protest those laws. This made many people angry because they didn't want to change, but in the end, the protesters won, and the rules changed forever. Dr. King was born in 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. He was named after his father. He was called Martin Luther. Small but strong, Martin Luther King Jr. rode bikes with his brother and sister. Martin Luther King Jr.'s father was the minister of a church. He taught his children to stand up for what is right. He taught them to speak out against what is wrong. He taught them that all people deserve justice, which means they should be treated fairly. When he was 6, Martin Luther King Jr.'s best friend told him that he was no longer allowed to play with Martin Luther King Jr. Why? Because Martin Luther King Jr. was black and his friend was a white. Segregation laws were meant to keep black people and white people apart. They kept kids apart, too. Martin Luther King Jr. felt bad. Why wasn't he good enough to play with his friend? Martin Luther King Jr.'s mother told him he was just as good as anybody else's. And she told him that the world was wrong. He wiped his tears. Then Martin Luther King Jr. promised that one day he would change the world. Change for Peace. Martin Luther King Jr. received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. At that time, he was the youngest person ever to have received it. He was just 35 years old. Martin Luther King Jr. was a boy in the late 1930s. Many things were different than how they are today. Transportation. Most people still traveled by horse and buggy. Only some people were lucky enough to have cars. Cities. Some of New York's famous skyscrapers were finished in the 1930s. Two of them are the Empire State Building and the Rockefeller Center. Money. Candy bars cost about a penny. That doesn't sound like much, but dollars and pennies were worth a lot more back then. U.S. events. Many people did not have jobs during this time, called the Great Depression. Many people had very little money. Toys and free time. Children played board games and listened to programs on radio for the fun. School. Times were tough. Some families couldn't afford to send their kids to school. Books, clothes, and shoes were too expensive. Martin Luther King Jr. grew up listening to sermons in church. He learned how powerful words can be used to help people understand ideas. When Martin Luther King Jr. was 14, he entered a speech contest. He put his anger about the unfairness of separate rules for white people and black people into words. He made people think. He made them feel. The judges loved his speech, and he won. On the bus ride home from the speech contest, the driver told Martin Luther and his teacher to give up their seats to white people. Martin Luther King Jr. had to stand for 2 hours. He was mad, but he didn't say anything. He knew he could be arrested, hurt, or even killed if he did. A student of peace. Martin Luther King Jr. worked hard in school. He finished college when he was 19 years old. He moved to the northeastern U.S. and continued at school. He wanted to be a minister like his father. In 1952, Martin Luther met Coretta Scott and fell in love. They got married and moved to South Alabama. There, Martin Luther King Jr. worked hard as a minister. By 1955, he had gone as far as you can go in school. He had earned the title doctor. Now he was Dr. King. The Kings moved back to the South to work for equal rights. They saw that not much had changed for black people there. They still couldn't swim in pools or go to school with whites, but they still had to stand on buses so white people could sit. In Alabama, Dr. King had a chance to help. A bus driver told a woman named Rosa Parks to give up her seat to a white person, but she didn't get up. Rosa Parks was arrested because she had broken the law. Lots of people went to a meeting to decide what to do. Maids, janitors, and other people working rode the buses. They asked people to not ride buses until blacks and whites had the same rules. They called it a boycott. They put Dr. King in charge because he had a way with words. For more than a year, black people walked. They took cabs and even rode mules to get around. The boycott was not easy, but finally people listened. Black people and white people would have the same rules on buses. Unfortunately, many people did not follow the new rules. Dr. King went all over the country giving speeches. He talked about injustice and civil rights. He made people think. He made people feel. He asked people to join him in protests for change. Black and whites marched together to protest bad laws. They went to places where only whites were allowed. A lot of them got arrested. Angry people called them names. Sometimes even the marches were hurt or killed. Newspapers, television, and radio reported it all. People around the country were mad. They saw how bad it was to have separate rules. Peaceful protest. Dr. King wanted to make the world a better place. He did this with peace, not hate or violence. But people sometimes hurt him. But Dr. King did not hurt them back. He fought back with peaceful protests and powerful words. One person who saw what was going on was President John F. Kennedy. The president wanted to show that he agreed that rules would be the same for blacks and whites, so he invited Dr. King to visit them at the White House. 8 awesome facts about Dr. King. 1. Dr. King and his father were both named Michael King, but his father changed their names in 1934. 2. Once King was hit with a brick during a peaceful march, he did not fight back. He kept walking. The statue of Dr. King at his memorial in Washington, D.C. is huge. Its head weighs 27 tons. Dr. King gave 2,500 speeches during the last 11 years of his life. Dr. King liked to dance. Dr. King learned good ideas from the man in India named Gandhi. He used peaceful protests to fight unfair laws. Dr. King and Coretta Scott had 4 children: Yolanda, Martin Luther III, Dexter, and Bernice. Dr. King told people to like each other like brothers and sisters. Dr. King's dream. It was August 28, 1963, in Washington, D.C., in the same city where our country makes its laws. A huge crowd of people, black and white, cheered. They had come to stand with Dr. King to protest bad laws. Everyone in the crowd wanted the same rules for white people and black people. Dr. King's voice boomed and he gave his most famous speech, called I Have a Dream. Dr. King's dream was for all people to be treated the same. Hard times. 3 months after Dr. King's speech, President Kennedy was assassinated. It was a hard time for the United States, but the next president, Lyndon Johnson, kept working to change the rules. His final years. The rules did change in 1964 and again in 1965. Laws were not the same for black and white people, but now everyone followed the new rules right away. For the next several years, Dr. King and many others kept working. Dr. King gave speeches, he planned peaceful protests, and helped others. In 1968, Dr. King was in Memphis, Tennessee, helping black garbage collectors protest for better pay, but angry people still did not want to change. A man with a gun assassinated Dr. King. Black and white people around the world were very sad. They had lost a man who made them think and feel. They had lost a man who helped make a world a better place, with peace and justice. But Dr. King left us his words to remember him by. A memorial to peace. You can visit a national memorial to Dr. King. It is in Washington, D.C., where you can read his words about hope that people could live together peacefully with justice. You can also stand next to a 30-foot statue of him. It is called the Stone of Hope. From far away, the Stone of Hope looks gray, but up close, it is really many colors. The colors stand for all the different people in the world. That's because Dr. King stood up for right to all be treated fairly. Thank you guys for watching this video. If you enjoyed this, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Bye!